An aircraft has an airspeed of 80 meters per second and a heading of 30 degrees north of east. Excuse me, be quiet, please. If the wind is blowing with a velocity of 30 meters per second to the south, how fast and in what direction is the plane flying with respect to the ground? Okay, so let's set this one up. So given, well, aircraft as an airspeed. So this is our velocity compared to the air or the wind or whatever. So the velocity of the plane compared to the air is equal to 80 meters per second. And it has a heading of 30 degrees north of east. Well, if I kind of draw north, south, east, west, 30 degrees north of east is kind of like that. So and that's what we consider to be polar coordinates. So it's already in polar coordinates, 30 degrees. And so if I were to draw it, I would draw it something like this. This is what the vector looks like. And then the velocity of the wind is 30 meters per second to the south. So I'm going to call that the velocity of the air is 30 meters per second. And in south is what angle? You have a choice. You can go around and call it 270, or you can call it negative 90, either way. I'll go ahead and call it 270. So that means it's going down like this. And what are we trying to find? We're trying to find the velocity of the plane compared to the ground. So, zoom out a little bit. So let's solve. Now the basic equation is the velocity of the plane is, compared to the ground is equal to the velocity of the plane compared to the wind plus, I'm using air instead of wind. The velocity of the plane compared to the air plus the velocity of the moving air. And this is with compared to the ground. Okay, well, this is a vector equation, so I have to and this is what I'm trying to find, so I don't have to rearrange this. It's already arranged properly. And so I can do this. I can say, well, my result is just the velocity of the plane compared to the air plus the velocity of the air. And then I can write this in polar coordinates. Well, this is now, if I were to add these together, I would lose a whole lot of points on my test. So don't do that. Don't add vectors that are in polar coordinates. You have to change them to rectangular coordinates. So let's squeeze it in here. I'll have to write really small. 80 meters per second times the cosine of 30 degrees and 80 meters per second times the sine of 30 degrees. Now this is a silly thing to do. 30 meters per second times the cosine of 270. 30 meters per second times the sine of 270. And the reason that's silly is that I can just look at the picture of it. I know that it has no x component. It's all in the negative y direction. But in any case, let's come back to this. So if I add these together, I'm going to get the velocity of the plane. Well, that's going to be 80 meters times the cosine of 30. So 80 times the cosine of 30. So make sure your calculator's in degrees. and then 80 times the sine of 30. And again, that's one, if you have memorized, you know it's going to be 40, because the sine of 30 degrees is 1/2. And then I'm going to add to it the velocity of the plane in the air. Well, cosine of 270 is 0. So you get 0. And the sine of 270 is -1. -1 times 30 is -30. So when I add these together, I get my answer in rectangular coordinates. But of course, I'm going to express my answer in polar coordinates. So the velocity of the plane is equal to the x component squared plus my y component squared, in meters per second. So I keep moving that around. So 69.3 squared plus, well, 10 times 10 is 100. And then raise that to the 0.5 power. And I get 70? Yeah, that looks about right. Not much bigger than the 69.3. Now let's get the angle. The y component over the x. The units will cancel out. So 10, well, let's clear that. Inverse tangent of 10 divided by 69.3 equals 8.21 degrees. So, I can say that the velocity of the plane is equal to 70 meters per second at 8.21 degrees. That's my answer. So that's, now let's draw a sketch, make sure this is right. So here's 80, let's go the velocity of the plane compared to the air. So we'll say this is 80, and then this is 30 degrees. And then this is due south at 30, so there's half, so it's a little bit less than half. So this is the velocity of the plane compared to the air, and this is the velocity of the air. So my result would be this. So 70, yeah, a little bit less than the 80. That looks about right. And then pretty small angle here, 8.21. That looks about right. So I used the sketch to check my work. Okay. And that is how you do that. Any questions? Okay. That is all.